When economists seek to understand consumer behavior, one of the tools that they rely on most heavily is something called utility. Utility is sort of a fictitious measure of how valuable or how much worth someone gets out of a product or out of consuming a product. The problem that we have with utility is that it differs for every person. People measure the value from a good very differently, and sometimes the same person can measure the value differently from one day to the next. But the general idea of the tool is that people seek to have more utility or more happiness as they consume more products. So we assume that people consume things because of the happiness that it gives them. There are two different kinds of ways of looking at utility. One is called total utility. Total utility is simply the summation of the happiness that you receive from all of the units of the same good you consume. So if you go to, say, 15 concerts during the course of a year, the total utility is the happiness that you receive from all of those concerts. The other way of looking at utility is something called marginal utility. Margins in economics are small incremental changes. And so when we look at marginal utility, what we're looking at is the additional utility you receive from consuming one more unit. So as you go from your first concert to your second concert, the amount of additional utility that you receive is the marginal utility. One of the things that we notice about utility is that it tends to diminish over time. Think about something you have eaten before. And a lot of times when we eat, the first bite that we take of something is very satisfying. It gives us a lot of happiness. But as we eat progressively more and more and more of something, it gives us less additional happiness. This is a problem because for firms wanting you to buy something, the fact that you get less happiness from an additional unit means that you're unlikely to buy more of the product. Let's take a look at a graph here of total utility. With total utility, what we see is that as we increase the amount that we consume across the x-axis, we see that total utility along the y-axis goes up. And it goes up, and it goes up, and it continues to go up until it reaches some point where it begins to fall. At that point, you've consumed so much of a good that consuming any more of it makes you less happy. So it's sort of like eating Halloween candy. You eat and eat and eat until you get sick, and then you eat one more piece. That's making you less happy. The graph of marginal utility mirrors this graph somewhat. What we see is that as long as total utility is increasing, marginal utility is positive. When we reach that peak of total utility, then marginal utility is zero. And if total utility is falling, marginal utility is negative. That decrease in marginal utility is something that we refer to as diminishing marginal utility. The idea that each additional unit of something gives you less happiness than the previous one. So whether it's eating donuts or following U2 around the country from one concert to the next, the additional units of happiness that you receive give you less happiness. The additional units are less satisfying than the previous ones. Now getting back to the idea of this and firm behavior, this helps to also explain the downward slope of the demand curve. Because each additional unit gives you less happiness, in order to entice you to buy more, the firm must lower price. If they don't lower price, you won't buy more because it's not worth it. The marginal benefits, the marginal additional benefits that you receive from something are not equal to the additional costs in terms of what you're paying for them. So to change that relationship, the firm must lower the price. Reduce the cost, the marginal cost, so that the marginal benefit seems greater than so the marginal benefit would be greater than the marginal cost.